Order, please. The Honourable the Premier on an introduction.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to welcome some very special guests here to our province, some of my colleagues from our Atlantic provinces for our Council of the Atlantic Premiers meetings. And so far, so good, Mr. Speaker. They wanted to come over and see how minority government works in Nova Scotia. And I indicate it works extremely well. They may not want to have that in their own province, but it works very well here. Mr. Speaker, yeah, I brought some friends with me. Mr. Speaker, I'll take an opportunity in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, three very distinguished individuals. And I'll start off with the elder statesman of those three. And of course, that is our friend from Newfoundland and Labrador, Deputy Premier Tom Rideout. And I'd like to welcome Tom here to Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the eldest of the maritime premiers from New Brunswick at the at the age of late 30s, Mr. Speaker. Our friend from New Brunswick, Premier Sean Graham. Welcome, Premier Graham. Speaker, the baby of all the premiers, the youngest of all the premiers, Mr. Speaker, and a good friend to Nova Scotia, as was his father when he was in his position, Premier Robert Giz, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome them here, and unfortunately, I'm not here for question period, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know the opposition is disappointed, but I will be sending my thank you to my colleagues from the other Atlantic provinces for the timing of this meeting. So thank you very much for joining us.
We would like to also extend a warm welcome to all visitors in the gallery here today. We'll commence with the daily routine, presenting and reading of petitions, presenting reports of committees, tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable the Minister of Health, Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a report entitled A Physical Activity Strategy for Children and Youth and Families in Nova Scotia, Active Kids, Healthy Kids.
Hear, hear.
The report is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table the DHA annual reports for South Shore, Southwest Nova, Annapolis Valley, Colchester, Cumberland, Pictou County, Guysborough, Cape Breton, and Capital Health, as well as the IWK.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to inform the House that a very significant committee has been established, a roundtable on environment and sustainable prosperity, to advise and to assist government on issues of economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. The roundtable consists of 19 members. Some organizations were invited to participate, and some individual members responded to our call to stand and let their name stand for representation on this committee. Mr. Speaker, our chosen panel of 19 members includes representatives of the legal and academic communities, as well as people from industry and from the environment sectors. And I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, to inform the House that the individuals on the roundtable represent organizations from almost every region of this great province of ours. Mr. Speaker, I'm also glad to report that Mr. Ray Cote, has graciously agreed to chair the roundtable. Mr. Cote is Professor of Environmental Studies at the School for Resources and Environmental Studies. He's also Director of the Eco-Efficiency Centre at Dalhousie University. Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Ministers of Environment and Labour and Economic Development will also participate in this roundtable, and they will provide a direct link to the Government Deputies Forum on Sustainable Prosperity. A complete list of the members on the roundtable can be found on the Department of Environment and Labour website at www.gov.ns.ca/ENLA. Mr. Speaker, selecting the members of this roundtable was a very, very difficult task, and it was a very difficult task because of the high caliber of expertise we saw in all the candidates who applied. It truly was heartening to see the great surfeit of riches of individuals who are willing to give of their time to help move the government forward and the province forward in terms of its economic and environmental prosperity and sustainability goals. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, it is likely that there will be at times that the roundtable will be asked to create a working group on particular issues, and we have these candidates' names on file, and we can turn to them to request their participation in these working groups. So I want to thank everybody who applied and who let their name stand, because as I said, Mr. Speaker, I was overwhelmed by the quality of people who are willing to give of their time to help the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this government is creating a new path forward which brings together its economic plan, opportunities for sustainable prosperity, along with its recently released social plan, the Social Prosperity Framework. And the Roundtable on Environment and Sustainable Prosperity will provide one way for Nova Scotians to have input to the government's new path forward. In particular, as I mentioned, the Roundtable will be asked to give advice on issues referred to them by government relating to environmental sustainability and economic prosperity. The government will also request that the Roundtable carry out a comprehensive public review of the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act every 5 years. That act, as you know, is unique across the world, really, and lays out government's environmental goals and commitments until the year 2020. I will also seek the advice of the Roundtable when preparing annual reports on the progress of government in attaining these significant goals. Mr. Speaker, the Roundtable and the role this government has laid out for it shows our commitment to consulting with stakeholders on important social and environmental issues here in the province of Nova Scotia. And I'd like to publicly once again thank the 19 Roundtable representatives who have put their names forward to serve their province in this way. I'd also like, Mr. Speaker, to ask the House to recognize those Roundtable members who are able to brave the weather to be here today in the gallery for this announcement. And so I invite the House to join me in acknowledging their presence and their commitment to serve Nova Scotia in the future as members of the Roundtable. And so if I may, before the opposition and the Liberal Party respond to the statement, if I may ask those in the gallery to stand and we recognize them and thank them. Raymond Cote, the chairperson, Martin Janowicz, Robert Grant, Dr. Edith Callahan, Dwight Wynot, Peter Lund, Anne Janega, Peggy Crawford, Stephen Talbot, Mark Butler, Tamara Lawrence and her son William, who is what we're doing this all for, Judy McMullen, and Stephen Hallboat. And so I want to ask the House to give them a very warm welcome.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise as the environment critic for the official opposition to say that it is a good day for the environment in Nova Scotia when people of this quality and stature stepped forward to assist the minister by giving him advice on the way that he carries out his duties, and in particular on the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. And this puts into place, Mr. Speaker, the second of the three essential parts of any good environmental sustainability regime, but there still is one part missing, which I'll get to in a moment. What we do know is that the minister will now receive good advice. The people that have stepped forward today represent all sectors of the Nova Scotia economy, including agriculture and forestry. They represent manufacturing and mining interests. They represent environmental activists, people who are knowledgeable in environmental law, people who have devoted their lives to the study and promotion of sound environmental practices. There are people representing municipalities. There are people representing the Aboriginal community. Mr. Speaker, this is a fine group of people, and we're all very pleased that they've stepped forward to serve on this round table. And good advice is only one part of the three parts that are necessary. The second part, which this legislature passed earlier this year, was to have appropriate and laudable goals for environmental promotion and sustainable prosperity. And we passed that earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, unanimously, and the goals are good. It's the third piece, Mr. Speaker, that is still missing, and that is real, enforceable accountability for the goals that have been laid out in the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. The only accountability mechanism in the Act is an annual report by the minister to the House. And as we know from other situations that have come to our attention, the government tends to treat annual reports as marketing opportunities. There are no rules, no guidelines, no restrictions on what it is that the minister says, what he puts in, what he leaves out. And that is why we in this caucus have proposed the establishment of the Office of the Environment Commissioner, who will be attached to the Office of the Auditor General, just as is done at the federal level, because that person will be independent and professional and arm's length and well-respected and well-funded to ensure that Nova Scotians get accurate reports on government's progress towards meeting these environmental goals. So, Mr. Speaker, two of the three parts are in place. We have proposed the third, and we look forward to the government finally accepting real, enforceable accountability mechanisms so that we can all move forward for what we all want, and certainly the people in the gallery today want, and that is an environmentally sustainable Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pleasure I rise today to commend the Minister and the government for setting up a round table on the environment. I think this is long overdue, and I couldn't be more pleased with the selection of people that he has chosen. It's well-rounded and will truly represent all the different views in Nova Scotia and all the views that we so badly need to put in place to ensure that our children and our grandchildren live in a healthy and safe environment. And also for industry, industry that can operate in a healthy and environmentally positive way will make more money and indeed help our economy grow and prosper, and I think that's very important too. The only real concerns I have is I hope that the government takes the recommendations of the round table and acts on them. Doesn't delay them, but acts on them. We've seen the government pass, I think, a very regressive bill on windmill taxation here last year. That put us backwards in Nova Scotia. We need clean, affordable energy, and that bill did not do anything to help that. I hope that the round table will look at those types of issues and make recommendations to government to change these things and indeed make it a healthier and safer place to live in Nova Scotia. And as we move forward and we see the concerns being raised every day regarding the environment, we see just how serious it is. And as time goes on, I think it's going to become more obvious that these issues have to be addressed now. We can't wait to address these issues, and they have to be done now. As far as hiring someone else in another position to do that, I think the round table works well. It will do a good job, and do that. We don't need to add to our bureaucracy. We need to invest money in renewable energy. and in other things that will help our economy grow and make it a safer and healthier place to live. It's, you know, this government they tout their new bill, and the only thing I didn't like about their new bill, it didn't have the goals in it I think that we should have, the really hard, solid things that need to be done that we know about today. And we talk about so many things as we go through and see what's happened with illness. And illnesses are being tied to different things that we thought was so safe. And, you know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, if you talked about stopping smoking, everybody was up in arms. And even the smokers today now want to stop smoking. They don't want to smoke in places. And there's some very positive amendments made or are going to be made during this legislature regarding smoking. But that's only one part of it. The big picture we have to address. And again, I want to commend the minister for setting this roundtable up. A very impressive group of people that will be working on this. And the only caution I have, if the government doesn't listen to them, we will be after the government to ensure that they do and do what's best for Nova Scotia and make sure Nova Scotians have the cleanest and healthiest place to live in the world. Thank you.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, if I may be allowed to make an introduction of a member who just arrived who's on the round table, who I'd like to ask the House to welcome, Mr. Lawrence Nason, the Executive Director of the Federation of Agriculture, is also on the round table and was able to make it for this announcement. I'd ask the House to recognize and welcome Mr. Nason.
The Honourable the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, I'd like to make an introduction before I read my statement. Mr. Speaker, seated in the East Gallery today is Don Stegan, Executive Director of Recreation Nova Scotia, Janice Silver, Halifax Regional School Board, Ann Cogden, the IWK, Fran Dunn, the Nova Scotia Fitness Association, Mary Kikuchi, Gymnastics Nova Scotia, Alan McAvoy and Brianne Lynch from the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia, Janet Barlow, the Ecology Action Centre, Dr. Phil Campagna from Dalhousie University, Dr. Angie Thompson from St. Francis Xavier, as well, Mr. Speaker, are members of my staff, Farida Gabani, Mike Arthur, Natasha Warren, Lucas Wyde, and Duff Montgomery. I'd ask them to please rise and receive the warm welcome of the House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place today to address what can only be referred to as a crisis in our province. And that crisis is the physical inactivity of our children and youth. Letting kids be kids used to mean allowing them the freedom to play outside and to use their imagination to create new and spontaneous games. To stay after school for a pickup game of soccer or baseball or hockey. Getting home on time for dinner was a challenge for many of us growing up, Mr. Speaker. Now that same call for the dinner is no longer made by our mothers or our fathers on the porch outside to the local playground. It's made to the TV room or the computer room. The reply of 5 minutes is the same, but now it's wanting to get to the next level of a video game, not to do one more lap on their bicycle. Mr. Speaker, childhood inactivity and obesity is not a unique concern in our province. It is a nationwide challenge. Today, Mr. Speaker, I was proud to announce the launch of the province's renewed Active Kids, Healthy Kids strategy. This $5.3 million strategy is aimed at continuing to improve the opportunities and support for our communities across the province to help our kids become more active and healthy. Like all strategies that come from the Department of Health Promotion and Protection, it is based on strong research, evidence, and best practices. Mr. Speaker, research has told us that a greater focus must be placed on our teenagers, especially our young women. The most recent physical activity levels of children and youth in Nova Scotia showed that we have a positive impact with children in grades 3. However, it also showed that we have work to do with our high school students. This renewed strategy will address those gaps and build on our successes. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to meeting the challenge head-on, and we will reevaluate our progress again in 2009. Mr. Speaker, as I stand before my colleagues, I know that there is not one simple answer that is going to solve this issue, and that is why this strategy is only one part of the overall plan to make physical activity accessible to all Nova Scotians. Getting children active is about more than just telling them to get outside and run around. We need to create a culture that will support healthy choices. Mr. Speaker, we have a vision for a new Nova Scotia, and that vision includes providing safe, accessible, healthy places for our children to go and to be active. Mr. Speaker, this renewed strategy is another thread in our government's overall social policy framework for Nova Scotians, and will support the goal and themes of children and youth strategy as well as the crime prevention strategy. By providing children with new opportunities and places to be more physical active, we are providing them with further support and mentors to help them grow and become well-rounded and responsible teenagers and adults. Mr. Speaker, we invest $3 million annually toward recreation facility development. These investments help communities build new playgrounds, update existing sports and recreation facilities, and support healthy and safe communities. Mr. Speaker, we have also started a new program called Building Facilities and Infrastructure Together, or BFIT. This is a $50 million 10-year commitment that will be used specifically for the construction of or renovation to major sport facilities. Mr. Speaker, the new Nova Scotia includes $600,000 for a new indoor soccer field in Pictou County, $400,000 for a new outdoor track and field facility at in the Annapolis Valley, over $800,000 for a new multi-sport recreation field house in Bridgewater, Mr. Speaker, and $5 million for a new sports facility in Queens Municipality. Mr. Speaker, the new Nova Scotia will have more safe and accessible places for our children, for our youths and families, and our seniors to go and to be active. Mr. Speaker, we also know that one barrier to children participating in physical activity is the associated cost. That is why we introduced a tax credit that will be used for sport and recreation registration fees. Since the launch, we have increased that tax credit to $500 per child per family. Mr. Speaker, we also fund kids sport programs where children and families can access up to $300 to cover their child's registration fee. Mr. Speaker, all school boards have access to Sport Animators program that is run in partnership between my department and the Department of Education. These animators are the bridge, that gap between school and recreation programs, and help facilitate new opportunities for kids to participate and get active. Mr. Speaker, 4 years ago, these positions did not exist, and today they have implemented programs across the province that help get more children outside and moving. Mr. Speaker, these are just some of the initiatives and programs already underway to help our communities become healthier and safer. Mr. Speaker, as I close my remarks, I want to ask for the support of all members of the legislature. We all have a vested interest in this. Inactivity leads to child obesity, which can also lead to chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes. Inactivity has the potential to put an increased demand on our healthcare system, and it is all preventable. We have a role to play in setting an example for our children and our youth. I encourage everyone to get active and to become a role model for physical activity. Mr. Speaker, I thank everyone involved in the Active Kids, Healthy Kids, my staff, and the community leaders across the province. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the Premier, who held this portfolio before me and whose support has been invaluable in the development of this renewed strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the Minister for his remarks on his new strategy, and I would like to thank all the people that are participating and have participated in the involvement of this new strategy and that are here in the gallery today. I agree. One of the first things that he mentions in his speech is that there is a crisis in Nova Scotia that has to do with physical activity. And while it's nice to receive some glossy material today, there are things that have happened in the province recently that the government has failed to address, and I hope they will move forward in addressing those issues. And I would like to take a few moments to talk about some of the issues in my own constituency revolving around healthy issues for youth and children. one of the things this government did was they did not address the issue in my constituency of the closing of one of our rinks. And people are trying to get a new rink built, but we're not sure if that's going to happen. So they are still looking for some help from the various departments at all levels of government. We have a field, Beasley Field in Dartmouth East, that is looking towards hosting the National Senior Baseball. And they need upgrades to that field. There's something else that can be done. The government's talking about investing $3 million annually in recreation facility development. So I'm not sure if they're talking about developing new facilities or perhaps fixing the ones we already have or replacing the ones that we've recently lost. Another issue which the government needs to address is the access to our P3 schools in the province, because there is a cost attached to that, and I am a little bit concerned about the road that the government's going down in looking at building more of these schools. We also have to look at the issue of busing children out of their own communities to other communities, especially in high school, where they don't have an opportunity or the same opportunities to get involved with organized sports or even things like going to the library after school. We have basically right now I think 750 students being bused out of the Eastern Passage area to go to school that's not in their own community, and I would believe that that would have an impact on what happens to those youth and their healthy lifestyles after school. Mr. Speaker, there's also an issue, and I'm not sure if through this strategy the department is going to address the issue of food security for children and youth in the province. And I know the minister talked about children from grades primary to 3, that there has been a positive impact so far with this department operating, and that we have to look at those other age groups, because apparently the junior high and the high school students fall out of the physical activity, and I know a lot of people are pushing for more physical activity in school. But I would like to say there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that's been done that needs to be fixed, and I hope the minister has a lot of luck in going forward with this, and especially the people that are going to be helping him from the various communities. And I do believe, in closing, that preventative measures and being proactive in our health care may be one of the very important steps that we can take to address the huge resources in the healthcare sector right now that we're facing. And maybe this is one of the roads that we need to go down and look at very carefully for the future of healthcare in the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the minister and congratulate him on his initiative that he's announced today. But knowing full well, and I think the minister knows full well, is that these are first steps that are being taken. There's much more that needs to be done. I also agree with my colleague from the NDP that preventative measures and being proactive in this is very, very important. Those are buzzwords, of course, but we know that they have to be followed by action in order to make anything out of this. Our children are under a great deal of stress today, much more so than when we were children. They find themselves in a lot of situations regarding their health, regarding their safety, regarding physical activity, and whether it's legislation that comes through this session of this legislature that deals with smoking, or it deals with preventing crime among our youth, or it just protects their safety and health in general, then we have to treat it as good legislation, something that should be done and will be done by us as legislators in order to protect our children and to protect the future of this province. I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker, of what I'm talking about, that it can be difficult for children and for groups that deal with children, and usually it's adults that run groups that deal with children. It can be difficult for them to obtain funds to do the necessary physical events or activity that the minister is talking about. When you talk about such a large figure, for instance, Mr. Speaker, is $50 million, spread it out over 10 years, that's $5 million a year. That doesn't even scratch the surface of the infrastructure needs that are required in this province to deal with such things as kids involved in physical activity and promoting physical activity on a higher level. For example, I've been involved for some time, or I was before I became an MLA, with the Glace Bay Little League. And we held national championships in Glace Bay. It was difficult several times to get any kind of money, substantial money, from governments to run those tournaments. As I think in the past, probably the largest amount we ever got was about $20,000 from the federal government. Those tournaments cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to run, but the benefit far outweighs the amount of money that you put into them. Not only do they benefit the direct participants, which may be a small number, but the message that it sends out that physical activity and being involved in sports and recreation is an important part of your everyday life. But again, I don't mean to be too critical. I did congratulate the minister, and the Active Kids, Healthy Kids is a great step. The amount of money, we can always question in this legislature the amount of money. But Mr. Speaker, I did want to just make those few points, and again, congratulate the minister on a fine start to this initiative. Thank you very much.
Here, here. Government's notices of motion, please. The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the cities of Halifax and Dartmouth have lost an important figure who helped push the development of the region in many capacities, and whereas Joseph Zatzman has passed away after a full 95 years, highlighted by many achievements, including serving as the first Jewish mayor of Dartmouth. And whereas during his term as mayor in the 1960s, Mr. Zatzman helped to establish Burnside Industrial Park and accomplished so much more, both professionally and in volunteer roles. Therefore, be it resolved that all members salute the tremendous contribution of this Order of Canada recipient for his work to better his beloved community, and send our sincere sympathies to his family and friends on their loss. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to, in concert with introducing the bill, introduce some people in the gallery, some hardy souls that have, in a number of cases, driven many miles to come in for the introduction of the bill today. And I would begin with Dr. Bernie McDonald. Mr. McDonald is the co-president at the NSAC. Dr. Leslie McLaren. Leslie is the other co-president at the Agriculture College. I'd like to introduce as well Mr. Jim Goyd, Executive Director of Development at the AC. These folks are in the East Gallery, and as well, Mr. Speaker, if I might, in the West Gallery, we have Dr. Glenn Stratton, a faculty member and a member of senior management, and an individual that worked extremely hard on this legislation. We have Karen Stratton, the Environmental Sciences Department, from the Environmental Sciences Department, and a lab instructor. As well, we have Dr. Vasantha Rupasinghe, Dr. Rupasinghe, and I wonder if our guests would rise and receive a warm round of applause from members in the legislature. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act respecting the Nova Scotia Agriculture College. Thank you.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act Respecting the Nova Scotia Agricultural College.
Bill 107, entitled An Act Respecting the Nova Scotia Agricultural College.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 130 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Disabled Persons Commission Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 130 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Disabled Persons Commission Act.
Bill 108, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 130 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Disabled Persons Commission Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Bill 109, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled, An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill 110, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Joseph Zatzman served as the mayor of Dartmouth from 1964 to 1967, demonstrating vision with his commitment to development of the Burnside Industrial Park and wide respect for his community spirit. And whereas Joseph Zatzman served the province, public institutions, and many charities while also pursuing a successful business career, leaving a legacy for his children and community. And whereas Joseph Zatzman's intelligence and ability to work with all members of the community helped to break down barriers of bigotry and discrimination in Nova Scotian society. Therefore, be it resolved that this House extend the deepest condolences to the family and many friends of Joseph Zatzman upon his passing at age 95 and commemorate the personal, community, business, and political progress that he achieved. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Joseph Zatzman, a former mayor of Dartmouth and successful entrepreneur who was integral to the economic prosperity which Dartmouth, Halifax, and the surrounding area now enjoy, passed away on Monday, December 10, 2007, at the age of 95. And whereas Mr. Zatzman had a love for his community, serving in such organizations as the Halifax Dartmouth United Appeal, Canadian Heart Fund, and the United Jewish Appeal. And whereas in 1997, Mr. Zatzman received the highest honour awarded to a Canadian, the Order of Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly take time to reflect on the life of Mr. Joseph Zatzman and offer our sincere condolences to his family. I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Windsor's Stuart McCann, a resident of College Road, remembers World War II like it was yesterday, even though it was 67 years ago. And whereas Mr. McCann was only 20 years old at the time, married with one child, but enlisted as an artillery gunner and served with the 5th Armoured Division. Whereas Stewart was one of 8 brothers who enlisted to fight in World War II, all who went overseas, with all 8 brothers returning, an almost unheard feat of its own. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly commend Stewart McCann of Windsor for his heroic service during World War II, a veteran who can convey many accounts of his historical proportion during his service overseas. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Special Constable Donnie Wright recently retired after 28 years of dedicated service to the town of Pictou, and whereas Constable Wright was responsible for enforcing town bylaws, traffic control, and other duties, but is remembered for his cheerful way and for taking the time to talk with people, locals, and tourists alike. And whereas Constable Wright now has more time for his hobbies as a talented folk artist, painting scenes on bottles, and as an avid gardener, therefore be resolved this House of Assembly congratulate Special Constable Donnie Wright for his long and dedicated service to the people of Pictou and wish him an active and enjoyable retirement. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in early 1973, the Lake Echo Fire Department was established, consisting of Fire Chief Brian Cox and 42 volunteers. Whereas in 1976, the first full-time firefighter, Albert Crouse, was hired. And in 1979, a second full-time firefighter, Gerald Crooks, was hired. And in 1990, Joan Kennedy became one of the first female fire chiefs in Halifax County, and ultimately the first female fire chief in Halifax Regional Municipality. Whereas at present, Robert Patey is the fire chief, commanding a membership of 29 members between Station 21 Lake Echo and Station 22 North Preston, responding to an average of 350 emergency calls per year. Therefore, be resolved, the members of this House of Assembly recognize the members of the Lake Echo North Preston Fire Department for their hard work and dedication to our community for the past 34 years and wish them well as they protect our community. I ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas legendary Pictou County native Bob Beaton passed away recently at the grand age of 94. Whereas Mr. Beaton will be remembered for a plethora of things, not excluding years spent as a Stellarton Town Councillor and insurance executive. Whereas it'll likely be sports and his longtime connection to boxing that he will be most associated with. Mr. Beaton was a champion fighter, turning to refereeing in 1935. Went on to handle 500 main events, 41 Canadian championships, 6 British Empire title fights, as well as a World Championship. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their condolences to the family of legendary Pictou County resident Bob Beaton on the occasion of his recent passing, providing yet another example of the long history of extraordinary people that come from Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, request waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Halifax Citadel.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Avon Fisher started his film Herbert as part of the Atlantic Film Festival's Viewfinders International Film Festival for Youth in 2006, and whereas Avon Fisher, a student at Citadel High School, recently won the Adobe Prize for Best High School Animation for his film titled Herbert at Ottawa International Animation Festival in September 2007, and whereas judges at the Ottawa International Animation Film Festival described Herbert as a rich and enjoyable film with a warm and understated sense of humor, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Avon Fisher on being named the winner of the Adobe Prize for Best High School Animation for his film Herbert and wish Avon much success in his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the employees of Glace Bay's branch of the Royal Bank of Canada made a donation of $1,254 to the Glace Bay Food Bank, and whereas Margie Dixon, manager, and the staff of the Royal Bank raised $254 through a silver collection and barbecue, and whereas a $1,000 corporate donation was added to that, the check was presented to Sandra McPherson and Patricia Hurley of the Glace Bay Food Bank. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Margie Dixon and her RBC staff for their generosity in fundraising for the Glace Bay Food Bank. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many worthwhile causes depend on the support of volunteers, and whereas Muscular Dystrophy Canada benefits from the contributions provided by individuals and groups who volunteer their services, and whereas the Bridgewater Fire Department received honours from Muscular Dystrophy Canada as Nova Scotia's Fire Department of the Year for its outstanding contribution as volunteers for the organization. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House congratulate Chief Wayne Thorburn and all the members of the Bridgewater Fire Department for their generous support to Muscular Dystrophy Canada. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for over 38 years, piano students in the Liverpool, Queens County area were able to study with one of the province's best piano teachers. And whereas it is so paramount of a piano teacher to have lots of patience, be very giving of their time, and have the confidence in their students. And whereas Nancy Anthony recently retired from teaching private piano, but still enjoys playing piano for churches, weddings, and funerals throughout Queens County. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Nancy Anthony for her many years of teaching the gift of music through piano to students in the Queens area, and commend Nancy for her belief that everyone has it within themselves to succeed. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the grey seal population around the coast of Nova Scotia is expanding exponentially and has increased from less than 10,000 animals 40 years ago to levels exceeding 300,000 today. And whereas the huge grey seal population is preventing the recovery of the groundfish stocks around Nova Scotia, as well as infecting remaining cod stocks with sealworm parasites. Whereas the potential harvest of the grey seal resource is being prevented by lack of access to areas where populations congregate and accessible to sealers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature recognize the urgent need to address the grey seal problem and help in facilitating 2008 grey seal harvest by recognizing the long-established sealing activity on Hay Island as a traditional harvest and grant access to the island for the purpose of an orderly and humane upcoming season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. The motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 18, 2007, the United Way Board of Directors announced the winner of the Herbie Weaver Award. And whereas this award is presented annually to an individual who has made an exemplary contribution as a community leader. And whereas dedicated volunteer Wayne Weatherby, well known for his enthusiasm and community pride, was the recipient of this prestigious award. Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Wayne Weatherby on being named as the 2007 recipient of the Harvey Weber Award and on Wayne's dedication and commitment to the community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the month of September was Continuing Care Month and this year's theme was Above and Beyond Because We Care, and whereas continuing care programs and services help people to maximize their independence, promote their well-being, sustain and enhance their quality of life, and support families to meet the ongoing care needs of their loved ones, whereas the continuing care employees at Willow Lodge and Tatamagouche not only provide high-quality care, but reveal energy, compassion, and empathy in their daily work, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the continuing care workers at the Willow Lodge for their many ways that they go above and beyond to contribute to the community and to enrich the lives of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. The time is now 12:01 and we'll go to 1:31. Order, please. The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Small options homes offer community-based home-like environments for disabled adults. However, this department's budget for food for clients and their live-in staff is woefully inadequate. At one small options home, the budget is $480 per month for 3 clients and their live-in caregiver. That's less than $4 per day per person in base funding for all their food needs. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister, why does her department underfund the food budgets for these residents and live-in staff?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for bringing this important issue to the floor, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, through the Services for Persons with Disabilities, Mr. Speaker, we do provide assistance, Mr. Speaker, to thousands of Nova Scotians who find themselves in need of our assistance, Mr. Speaker, through a variety of programs, independent living programs in the community, Mr. Speaker, as well as small option homes, as well as the more complex cases that are dealt with, Mr. Speaker, on an individual basis. We attempt, Mr. Speaker, to assist those Nova Scotians to the very best of our ability, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, vulnerable people in Nova Scotia should be able to eat according to Canada's Food Guide. One worker described these residents as eating a lot of cereal, bread, and milk. Only the milk delivery service became too expensive, so they had to convert to powdered milk a few months ago. Any meat they do eat is bought from the clearance pile. And if it weren't for this meat, the staff person says they'd live on a lot of pasta. My question to the Minister of Community Services, when will her department review the food allowances for residents and small options homes?
The Honourable the Member of Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As with all of our programs, Mr. Speaker, we review them on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to do so.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, many of these clients already struggle with obesity and other chronic health conditions. They cannot eat a healthy diet on $4 per day. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, how can she justify $4 per day to feed these residents and their live-in staff?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned before, Mr. Speaker, through a variety of programs, we provide assistance for individuals in their homes, Mr. Speaker. As well, we provide assistance for individuals who require a more elevated level of care, Mr. Speaker. We do so to the best of our ability, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to do so.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the 3 maritime provinces and the federal government committed money of aid to the beef processing plant in Prince Edward Island. Well, this processing plant is important to the cattle industry. It does little to help the imminent concerns faced by cattle farmers here in Nova Scotia. So my question to the Minister is, what is your government doing to immediately aid beef producers in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for that question. It's a very good question. Mr. Speaker, the government is working with the other provincial agriculture ministers across this country, Canada. It's certainly a national concern, and just recently this government put together a proviso, a plan that will enable the cattle producers in this province to apply for an interim payment through the federal program case.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the cattle industry is in jeopardy in our province, and this Conservative government must respond with action, not reports, advisory committees, or panels. Financial aid to the Atlantic beef producer is a fine step, but many farmers are wondering if they will even be around in the coming year to ship product to that plant. So my question to the Minister is, what is your government's plan to develop a long-term strategy for the cattle producers of Nova Scotia who have lost about 50% of their income this year?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the work that this government has done in concert with the Liberal governments in PEI and the Liberal governments in New Brunswick. Yes, we did, no pun intended, take the bull by the horns, and along with the federal minister responsible for COA, Peter MacKay, $12 million was invested in the plant in Borden, Prince Edward Island. And we are working, in fact, with the Maritime Beef Council, Mr. Speaker. We're working with the Beef Council, but, you know, we're not going to sit back and issue directives to the cattle industry. We want to work with them. This is a national problem, and certainly it's very challenging for the farmers right here in Nova Scotia. I believe that we will put in place some programs, but we want to make sure that the program works to the best advantage of the Nova Scotia producer, and in fact, that will be part of the strategy. But we're not going to just throw money at the program. We want to make sure that there are conditions in place that will ensure that the cattle industry sustains. Thank you.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Speaker, we've seen how this Conservative government mishandled the crisis in the hog industry. They said they offered financial help to those in that industry, yet many of those industries are in financial ruins, Mr. Speaker, and those farmers on the brink of bankruptcy. The PEI government is responding to the cattle industry in Prince Edward Island. They're not handing it off to the federal government. What Nova Scotia cattle producers want to know is, what is your government going to do to make sure that there is a cattle industry in this province, that it doesn't end up like the hog industry and go by the wayside?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition seems to be quite animated today, but I do want to tell the honourable member that in fact this government is working with the pork producers. We are working with the beef sector, and the fact of the matter is, this government on this side of the House since the year 2000 has invested $16.5 million into the pork industry, and this government since 2000 has invested, get this, Mr. Speaker, over $26 million into the beef sector alone. So we are doing a lot on this side of the House.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Immigration. It is reported this morning that in December of 2002, the province recommended that the mentorship fees under its about-to-be-launched program should be increased from $75,000 to $100,000. Now, between the I don't knows and I can't remember, the minister told the Chronicle Herald that he would check the record and find out why this was done. So my question to the minister is this: why did this government decide that immigrants who chose Nova Scotia should pay an additional $25,000 from their own pocket to take part in a program that ultimately failed most of them?
The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I guess as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows, I could probably fall behind the statement and say there's a lawsuit in progress and not answer it, but I guess, Mr. Speaker, there was a release yesterday by Mr. Lockyer with 14 questions and answers, and one of them, Mr. Speaker, was on the issue of the actual fee. It's not a fee, but the $75,000 that was charged as part of the mentorship program, and whether or not the government indeed did raise that to $100,000. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, yes, the government did do that. But that was part of a negotiation that went on, Mr. Speaker, and also part of that was the salary that was going to be paid to the immigrants as part of that program. And, Mr. Speaker, that salary, with regard to the proposal that was put forward, was $12,000, with the range maybe up to $22,000 or $23,000. So that was negotiated as well. Mr. Speaker, have no intention of probably going too much farther with it, but the other issue here is the question is being asked, Mr. Speaker, and it's very clearly laid out in documents that were put before. I guess I've got to be very careful with my wording here. I don't want to upset anybody. But document number 1 that was put before Public Accounts clearly shows that it was changed from $75,000 to $100,000, Mr. Speaker. And again, there is a lawsuit underway against the province right now, and I guess, Mr. Speaker, that's about the best answer and as far as I can go with the answer, but the answer is yes.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the importance of immigration to Nova Scotia's economic future, a point that has been made to the Conservative government many times by the business community here in this province, the minister said, quote, immigration just wasn't a priority, unquote, and that it was, quote, low on the pecking order, unquote. So my question, now that the minister has reviewed the record on how fees were set for the nominee program, will he tell Nova Scotians if his government made any other decisions that caused this program to be less attractive and less effective for the talented immigrants who are needed by our province?
The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, without question, the government of the day and this government have made a lot of decisions, Mr. Speaker, which have taken the immigration program from 1991 to 1995 to current day and doubling the numbers that we brought into this country, this province. We have definitely made decisions, Mr. Speaker, and good ones. Thank you.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a pattern by this minister. He tries to distract attention from the Conservatives' mishandling of this file by talking about the number of immigrants by Nova Scotia in 2006. Ironically, Mr. Speaker, in a document that was released to the media yesterday, Cornwallis Financial points out that it ran the nominee program until June of 2006 and that it wanted a better deal for immigrants. Cornwallis claims credit for any increase last year. So my question for the minister is this: does the minister agree that Cornwallis Financial can claim credit for its part in achieving the 2006 immigration results? And if not, why does the minister state that only his government can claim credit?
The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Gee whiz, I guess, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I should question the word mishandling, as an appropriate word. But anyway, I guess I'll leave it there. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this government has done a great job with the immigration program. Understand, Mr. Speaker, I think if they were worried about as much as worried about the immigrants of this province as they were about the politics, things might be a lot different right now. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are four other streams to our nominee program, Mr. Speaker. And those 4 other streams have brought in record numbers this year. So, Mr. Speaker, this government is doing a good job. We will introduce a new economic stream in the new year, Mr. Speaker, once we're finished with the current process that's going on within the public accounts and also the Auditor General. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question now will be for the Minister of Health. On July 21st, the Health Minister toured the Lillian Fraser Memorial Hospital in Tatamagouche. That very day, the Minister seemed unconcerned that the ER wasn't open, even though he was touring the riding with the Education Minister who represents those constituents. He told the Daily News, and I quote, "Does Tatamagouche need a 24-hour emergency department? I don't know, but the community feels it does." So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the minister is this: how long has the minister been considering closing down rural ERs in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I've never considered closing rural ERs.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the minister was already thinking about the Corpus Sanchez report at this time because he told the reporter there was an ongoing facility review. But in fact, he had already decided to cut off rural constituencies from emergency care. And I'll table a March 21st, 2007 briefing note that shows, to deflect attention away from the problem, he is willing to blame it on doctors and is considering closing ERs, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the minister is, which ERs is the health minister going to close? Digby, Yarmouth, New Waterford, Tatamagouche? When the Corpus Sanchez report comes out, who will it be?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, this government has no intention of closing rural ERs.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
It's sophistry, Mr. Speaker, because in those briefing notes they talk about changing roles. This is where this minister is going. The minister is simply stalling the release of this report. He doesn't want to be in the House when the news comes out about the ERs, so I challenge the minister to release the $1.1 million report. It is the people's money. It is the people's report. In draft form or not, release it.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite fully knows, the FASOR, or the facilities report, is going to be before me very soon. Mr. Speaker, I plan on releasing it to all Nova Scotians with an implementation strategy in the second week of January.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, on February 4, 1970, the Liberian oil tanker Arrow sank in Chedabucto Bay, breaking in half and spilling 8,000 tons of crude oil into the Strait of Canso. Winter winds and currents spread the oil 14 kilometers from Petit de Gras to the mouth of the strait and covered 18 kilometers of coastline in eastern Guysborough and Richmond counties. The Arrow spill left behind 3.5 million gallons of bunker C oil, and now this nearly 40-year-old environmental disaster may be coming back to haunt us. Mr. Speaker, questions have been raised as to where this oil was deposited and what monitoring has been done since that time. My question is, will the Minister of Environment and Labour indicate to this House the exact sites where the Arrow oil was buried and what monitoring has been done by his department?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the member raises a good question. I know that this has been an issue that's been in the news, and certainly my department has, over the years, been monitoring the situation. No traces of the oil contamination have been found to date, but we have an ongoing interest in this, and I would be happy to sit down with the member and to discuss further steps that might be taken to assure the residents of that area of their environmental health, safety.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst environmental disasters to ever hit Canada. The environmental impacts of the oil spill was a massive tragedy affecting species from shellfish, lobsters, fish, plankton, aquatic plants, and seabirds. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the large slicks pushing their way around the bay affected the beaches, rivers, lakes, lagoons, ponds, and coves. Now we've learned that after the cleanup, the remains of this bunker C oil may have been dumped in close proximity to residential areas. Department of Environment staff have indicated 7 sites exist in Richmond County, namely Janvrin's Island, Cape Ogut, West Derryshot, Doyle's Road, Lardoise, and McIntyre Lake. Residents in all of these communities, Mr. Speaker, rely upon private wells for their drinking water. And my question to the Minister, since he's indicated that ongoing monitoring has taken place, will the Minister commit to tabling in this House the exact details of the monitoring done by his department since 1970?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I'll even table any monitoring that was done or was not done when the member opposite was minister.
The Honourable the member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the cleanup of the Arrow oil spill lasted 2 years and was carried out by the Canadian Armed Services and the Federal Department of Transportation. Yet we now know that the oil was buried in municipal landfills, Crown land, and even private property. This clearly falls under the jurisdiction of the Provincial Department of Environment. Residents are concerned over possible contamination of their private wells and surrounding land. And my final supplementary is, what plan does the Minister have to monitor these sites and address any possible contamination to address the fear of residents of Richmond County?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I've been speaking with my staff as of Monday about the Arrow and the oil spill from that Liberian taker and any possible contamination, and certainly I'll be happy to share with the honourable member and to work with them to make sure that his residents feel that their safety is protected.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, Kevin Tobin is just one of hundreds of family caregivers who have been hit hard by the long waits for nursing home beds. He has not one but three elderly relatives with various needs, but none can access the care they need. His aunt requires care, and after several falls, the family decided to pay $91 a day to put her in a private facility. Her husband requires light care, and their different health needs mean that they must live apart. So my question for the Minister of Health is this: why aren't there more options to help senior couples stay together?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows the answer to that question, and it really revolves around the number of beds that we do have available in this province and the levels of service that they do provide. Mr. Speaker, we, through the continuing care strategy, will continue to expand the services available in communities. We will continue to expand the services available in long-term care facilities. And Mr. Speaker, we will have the right slate of options for all Nova Scotians as they move on into that phase of their lives.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Tobin's other elderly aunt lives alone in seniors' housing. She has dementia and has been declared incompetent. Her doctor recommended adult protection because she won't accept home care. His aunt doesn't have a working stove because her frequent burning of food was a fire risk, and so power was cut to the stove. Yet adult protection has refused to assess her. My question to the Minister of Health is, why is adult protection refusing to assess a senior whose own physician has recommended action?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite knows full well that I cannot speak to the specifics of any case. Mr. Speaker, if you could provide me that information, we'd be more than happy to look into it.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this elderly woman has started wandering at night. She isn't capable of buying groceries. She's relying on elderly relatives to provide meals. And this is not an isolated case, and that's the point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Tobin is worried for her safety. So my question for the Minister of Health is this: why can't seniors in danger get an assessment to ensure they are safe and properly cared for?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through adult protection, I know that when there are cases that are identified, that they review those with stringent measures. Mr. Speaker, I know that those individuals will be taken care of as best they can. But Mr. Speaker, we don't only be taking people for absolutely no reason. So if a member opposite could provide me with the information that he's speaking to, I'd be more than happy to look into it.
The Honourable the member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Webb Frizzell's wife, Angela, is a resident of Cedarstone and Truro. Mr. Frizzell is concerned about the quality of food served in nursing homes throughout Nova Scotia. He says seniors are frequently served processed foods and they have very little access to fresh fruit and vegetables. He was so concerned he took pictures of her meals, which I'll table, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister of Health: how much attention is paid to the quality of food served in nursing homes to ensure they follow the Canada Food Guide, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, long-term care facilities and the operators of those facilities have to fit into strict guidelines of the services they do provide to our seniors. Mr. Speaker, through monitoring and evaluation, we do check on a regular basis of the things that are going on within those homes. Mr. Speaker, I know that our providers are doing the best that they can, and Mr. Speaker will provide the healthiest meals possible.
The Honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Frizzell says that often one item runs out and he infrequently sees residents giving up their meal or getting up to leave without eating their meal, Mr. Speaker. He frequently pays out of his pocket to provide meals and fresh food for his wife, Mr. Speaker. The Homes for Special Care Act says very little, Mr. Speaker, about food quality. So I'd like to ask the Minister, why won't he ensure that dietary staff in nursing homes have the adequate budget to provide appealing, fresh and healthy foods that conforms with the Canada Food Guide, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that through the department and through the budgets that we do provide the adequate funding to take care of our seniors within those facilities, and I know that our operators are doing the best that they possibly can to provide healthy meals for those individuals. Mr. Speaker, again, if the member opposite could provide me information, I'd be more than happy to look into it.
The Honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some nursing homes don't even prepare fresh food on site, and others are contemplating sourcing out their food services. Our seniors deserve to have healthy, fresh meals no matter where they call home, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister, when will he commit to talking with Mr. Frizzell and working with his staff to ensure that all nursing homes serve healthy and appealing food to the residents, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know that through our continuing care, our Office of Continuing Care, that we provide as much as we possibly can to the operators of our province. Mr. Speaker, I will table a document that I have before me which talks about the growth summary in long-term care. And I just want to say during this department, during this government, it has grown in long-term care from 2002 to 2003 of $204 million to $342 million to provide services and food and safe lodging for our seniors.
The Honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. In recent years, Mr. Speaker, there's been an alarming number of complaints about shoddy workmanship in the building of condominiums. Owners are finding themselves on the hook for huge additional payments to cover deficiencies in the buildings. In a resolution a year ago, I called attention to this issue. In the last year or so, the Registrar of Condominiums has seen a surge in complaints, and it is so serious that there's now a new organization in our province called CONS that is formed to represent the issues and concerns of the owners of condominiums. My question to the Minister is, why has it taken so long for your government to listen?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, this is a government that does listen. We have listened and we have acted. Indeed, unfortunately, there have been some condos that have been constructed in this province, and I guess the ones we hear most about are in the Halifax area, where certainly the quality of workmanship left a lot to be desired. And there's no question about that. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we're hearing more complaints about residences, home building, and commercial construction too. So it's not just an issue for condos, although the honourable member has made a very good, a very good case for the condo issue, as has my colleague from Bedford. Has been speaking about that ever since he arrived, with great eloquence. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, it is an issue. I thank the honourable member for bringing it to the floor of the House today. Our government is acting on it, but I say it's not only an issue for condominiums. We're looking at the whole home building sector.
The Honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to follow up on that, if the Minister is serious about looking at the whole building sector, I wonder why he's not listening to the Atlantic Home Building and Renovation Sector Council, who has been calling on government to improve the building quality and increase consumer protection by having a commission formed that would make it mandatory for builders to be licensed. They've brought their concerns to the government. They've brought them to a committee of the legislature. They've spoken to both caucuses in the opposition. And yet the government has not moved to bring in the legislation which they have already had drafted and ready to go. Could the minister answer why he's not willing to move forward with legislation to create a residential construction commission that will license builders and hold them responsible?
The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
I have indeed, Mr. Speaker, met with the representatives of that group on at least 2 occasions, and their concerns certainly are legitimate. My colleague, the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection, also has raised this issue. We are working with that group. There were, to be quite frank, there were some things in their proposal that we felt needed to be modified, and they have gone back and they have, I think, adjusted some of the proposals that they have made, and Mr. Speaker, they will be revisited by government.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, licensing would go a long way to solving the problems that we've seen in the condominium and the other residential building sectors. But due to inaction on the part of government, I'm sure that many more substandard condominiums have been built in Nova Scotia in the last year. In other provinces, Mr. Speaker, there are warranties for homes and condominiums of 3, 5, and even 10 years in length. And these protect condominium owners for a longer period of time against poor workmanship. But here in Nova Scotia, condo owners are only protected for 1 year, not nearly long enough to see substandard structural problems. My question to the minister is, will you commit to protecting condominium owners in this province and increase the warranty for condominiums immediately?
The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, you know, this government is investigating public concern over residential construction, including condos, and we are in the process of, we'll be doing in the near future some public consultation to help specify the issues and possible solutions which will be acceptable to all parties. We're also reviewing the Condominium Act at this time, and there has been a committee formed for the purpose of determining what course of action is most appropriate to address the issues and to make recommendations whether or not how a solution can be put in place and whether they can be best addressed through legislation or through some other way.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Last Thursday, the Minister stated, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, this government is fully aware of the issues in healthcare system, which is why we are fixing them," end quote, Mr. Speaker. That's good to know, because we all want to know that the healthcare system will be there when we need it. Capital Health is currently boring electrosurgical units with smoke evacuators that are necessary to perform surgeries because the current equipment is old and obsolete. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, what is the Minister doing to ensure surgeries aren't cancelled because of a lack of proper equipment?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through our relationship and our workings with the Capital District Health Authority, I can say that we are working hard to ensure that they meet their targets as put up in keeping the promise that Dr. Gab Gagner put forward from Dell Surgery to make sure that they provide the type of surgeries and the type of time that they promise. Mr. Speaker, will continue to work through their business planning process, through their capital process, to make sure that they have the equipment that they need to perform the surgeries that all Nova Scotians require.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, investing in proper infrastructure and maintaining the proper equipment is the hallmark of good planning, so surgeries aren't cancelled. So it shouldn't come to no surprise that there are many of the operating tables at the Victoria General Hospital and many at the Halifax Infirmary are over 45 years old, Mr. Speaker. These tables are so old they are collapsing in the middle of operations due to metal fatigue, stated the Capital District Health Authority's capital equipment request. So I'd like to ask the Minister, what is the Minister doing about this safety hazard in our operating rooms?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And Mr. Speaker, through the process with Capital District Health Authority, they are identifying the capital requirements from here to 10 years hence on what the equipment they will need, on what kind of facilities they will need, and I look forward to having that report on my desk very soon.
The Honourable member from Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's little use for equipment without the proper staff to use them. CDHA warns that staffing shortages in many areas are critical and all programs will be affected. Their 2007 and 2008 business plan states that there is a need to reach collective agreements quickly to support recruitment and retention, end quote, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister, why has this Minister allowed his colleagues to introduce offensive legislation when he claims to know how to fix the healthcare system, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe that working with our district health authorities, making sure that they have the right type of infrastructure is what's required, making sure that they have the equipment to provide the service that all Nova Scotians expect. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with those individuals to make sure we have the best system that Nova Scotians can possibly afford.
The Honourable member for Preston. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Mr. Speaker, in April of this year, the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans announced it would be moving the 2 large Canadian Coast Guard vessels from HRM to ports in Newfoundland. Mr. Speaker, there is no reason to move these icebreakers from their ports in Dartmouth, which has currently providing excellent service to ports in St. John's, Newfoundland and Argentia. Other than a political maneuvering by the Conservative Prime Minister and his Minister of Fisheries, we have heard little from the provincial Conservative government on this issue, and I think it's time they explain their role in the matter. My question is, what discussions have you had with your federal Conservative counterparts regarding this devastating blow to the economy of HRM and another in the series of job losses, such as the Moyers Candy Factory? The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member opposite for a great question. He's absolutely right. The federal government made that announcement earlier this year. My colleague, the Honourable Minister of Fisheries for the province of Nova Scotia, met with the federal minister in that regard. Commitment was made that yes, those boats are being moved to Newfoundland, but there's commitment that 2 things, Mr. Speaker. There'll be no job loss to Nova Scotia, and smaller boats will be put in there to service this area. So it'll be business as usual, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Preston on his first supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This sudden and irrational move will directly remove close to $25 million annually from our local economy and directly affect 150 well-paid jobs here in HRM. Not to mention the various spin-off work from commercial companies employed in performing maintenance and upgrades to these ships. This political patronage from a federal cabinet minister who is struggling at home, Mr. Speaker, is nothing else. My question to the minister is, what is your government plan to stay this negative economic impact this will have on HRM and Nova Scotia? The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, to the honourable member, we have that commitment from the federal government, and as I said earlier, there are new boats that are on their way for this location, Mr. Speaker. But to the honourable member, I will take it up with my federal colleague in regards to the issue that he brought before the House today.
The Honourable member for Preston on his final supplementary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, representatives and the Coast Guard have spoken out about this move, and they know that this is a short-term political decision by a Conservative government without proper consultation with officials and correct analysis. Newfoundland does not have the infrastructure to support the vessels, meaning new facilities will have to be created rather than have government invest more money in upgrades to the ports here in HRM. While this is a federal issue, the Conservative government must deal with the provincial economic damage that will follow this poor decision. My question is, will you commit to pressuring the federal government, your Conservative counterpart, to stop this unnecessary and ill-advised decision that will have a long-term negative effect on Nova Scotia's economy? The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
The Honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. A survey of 2003 university graduates by the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission provided insights into the crushing debt burden being borne by Nova Scotia students. The survey found that 65% of the undergraduates from the class of 2003 borrowed to achieve their first degree, and half of those are having trouble making their student loan payments. Despite this, according to the MPHEC report, only a small group of them are aware of the availability of repayment assistance programs. My question to the Minister is, what is she doing to better inform Nova Scotia graduates of repayment assistance programs?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, thank you for the question. And it's a question that I have asked students when I've been meeting with them. How can we better communicate to students what programs are available? Because I agree with the member opposite that many students are not aware of. We have the programs listed on our website, but we're also looking at ways through school newspapers that we can communicate that information directly to the university students.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel on his first supplementary.
Minister, for that answer. I am looking forward to a better communication strategy because clearly a number of students, the most needy students, are falling between the cracks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the MPHEC report also showed a link between parents' level of education and income and indebtedness incurred by graduates. Graduates whose parents had a high school education or less accumulated 37% more debt than graduates from the most highly educated families. We also know that 40% of those families had family members who did not go on to university or college because they were afraid of taking on this debt. There's a clear link between socioeconomic background and high student debt and participation rates. So my question to the Minister is, why does her department continue to refuse to establish a targeted needs-based grants program for students whose families did not go to university or college and who do not participate for that reason? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite and to all members of the House, I believe that the reputation that this province has for quality education and university education is well known across Canada. And I would like to perhaps share a few statistics myself, that Nova Scotia has the highest university enrollment as a percentage of the total population. Compared to the national average, we are above the national average. And in fact, the comment about our Nova Scotia residents not having degrees or post-secondary education, 60.5% of Nova Scotia's population between the ages of 25 and 54 have a post-secondary certificate, diploma, or degree.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel on his final.
Mr. Speaker, the question was about the Nova Scotia students carrying the highest debt burden of students across Nova Scotia and the fact that we are one of only 2 provinces that do not have a targeted needs-based grants program. Mr. Speaker, more than half of all graduates in 2003 enrolled in further study. 3/4 of these graduates were continuing their studies while carrying a debt load averaging $28,000 each. We also found a correlation between higher debt and lower participation rate. So given that post-secondary education is so important for research and innovation and economic development, my question to the Minister is, when will she join with other Canadian provinces and introduce a graduate scholarship program for students in Nova Scotia? Thank you.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a number of programs within our department and a number of programs that this government funds to provide support for students, either is in the form of reducing tuition or looking at ways for them to pay back their debt, or to look at scholarships that are available for needy families. We will continue to do that. We have done an internal review of that. We have a consultation process going on across the province where people can come out and talk to us about the student assistance programs that we have and how we may improve that. We are always open to change.
The Honourable the Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister for Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. Mr. Speaker, 211 is an easy-to-remember telephone number that connects approximately 137 million U.S. citizens and millions of Western Canadians to a full range of non-emergency community, health, social, and governmental services in their community. Information and referral specialists answer calls, assess each caller's need, and link them to the best available services by consulting a comprehensive database. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, when is this government going to introduce a 211 service?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is correct. There are a certain number of Nova Scotians that are advocating the establishment of a 211 service. They have met with government on at least one or two occasions. We actually gave the group a significant amount of money to do a study to try and establish that it was a service needed in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, they came back at one time and they were looking for a considerable amount of dollars. This is one of these programs, Mr. Speaker, that has proved some value. Another thing, in Nova Scotia, we are looking at it, and I can say, Mr. Speaker, that I suspect that sometime in the future it will come, but I am not optimistic that it's going to come in the near future.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the United Way has stated that it is committed to funding 5% of ongoing operational costs, as well as assisting in the developmental funding or in-kind support for start-up costs, which would be less than $500,000. The United Way would like the province to pay for the other 95%. It works out to less than $1 million per year. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, when is this government going to provide funding for this essential service to our community?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, in 2005, the province received a proposal from the United Way Halifax to establish a 211 service. The proposal included or indicated that startup funding for 2006-2007 fiscal year would be $400,000 with $1 million a year minimum needed after that. Funding in the amount of $100,000 was to provide it to my department to complete a review of the United Way proposal and to provide further information to government. To this end, we engaged Deloitte, who has experience with the establishment of a 211 service in other Canadian provinces, to undertake a review of the proposal, and a review was completed in October 2006. And Mr. Speaker, I said, if funding is available, the government finds itself in a very positive financial situation, then it's likely that funding for 211 will come. If we don't find ourselves in a very positive financial situation, then it's likely that the implementation would be delayed.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the benefits of a 211 service won't just apply to its clients. The centerpiece of a 211 service is the efficiencies that it creates. It reduces misdirect calls to the government agencies. It reduces calls to 911. 211 data helps to identify new challenges in communities and enables governments to plan more flexible, effective responses to those challenges. Mr. Speaker, I ask, what is it that's preventing the government from adopting the 211, as it appears to be a win-win investment?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and
Mr. Speaker, I'm probably going to get in trouble for making this statement. Don't make it. But in my just about 9 years as cabinet minister, I have had lots of people come to me and say that if you do this, you're going to save the government money. And in my honest experience, the only way you save the government money is if you don't do something.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the last comment by the minutes is just too much there. I'm not even going to go there. My question is for the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker. Midwives in this province finally won their battle with the government last fall, and they received passage of the Midwifery Act, The midwives have been patiently waiting now for the ability to provide their services independently to mothers and families throughout the province. But like so many other professional organizations before them, they are still waiting on government to proclaim the legislation. So my question to the minister is, when is this act going to be proclaimed?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
I want to thank the member opposite for the question, and I really need to, well, I can't really thank the member for New Waterford for his interventions, but as interesting as they may seem. Mr. Speaker, there is an operational group that is working on the regulations that go along with this act. Mr. Speaker, I know they're doing a tremendous amount of work and having them ready so we can have them in place as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker also is very happy to make an announcement a number of weeks ago that this government will be funding midwives to be a part of primary health care teams.
The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, during the debate on the bill, during law amendments, our caucus and the midwives themselves were there to voice their concern the amount of work that's still left to be done on regulations and certification and transition teams. And the minister said at that time, don't worry, it'll get done. We're now over a year later. We're expecting proclamation of the bill any minute now. So my question to the minister is, will the regulations be ready, and will issues of transition and certification be resolved before the act is proclaimed?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the regulation process is a little bit out of my hand, what I could probably do is come back and report to the House of exactly where it is within the process and provide a more substantial date when the proclamation can happen for those regulations that I know that there are a number of people, including midwives and people in my department, to make sure that those regulations are ready for usage with the bill.
The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister knows that the Midwifery Act is proclaimed in whole without the regulations and transitional provisions and without the resolution of the certification issue that midwives, they're going to be offside on their own legislation. The government would actually be putting these midwives in the position of practicing illegally. So my final question for the minister, Mr. Speaker, how will the minister ensure that the Midwifery Act is proclaimed expeditiously while still ensuring that midwives can continue their practice?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we need to thank the members of the Midwifery Association that did bring this issue forward, that are working so hard to make sure that those regulations are as good as they possibly can be, making sure that we have the legislation. I was very proud to be the Minister of Health that brought the Midwifery Act in, just as I was proud yesterday to bring in and see third reading of the Dental Hygienist Act. So, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue. So, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to make sure that piece of regulation and that piece of legislation will be enacted upon as soon as we have those pieces ready.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. I'll table a newspaper article dated December 15, 2005. The headline states, and I quote, "Minister ordered to bring back committee." The courts ordered the Minister of Community Services to reactivate the Children and Family Services Committee and have members in place by the end of December 2005. That was 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister of Community Services, are all the positions on this committee filled today?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the group that the honourable member brings forward is a very important group, Mr. Speaker. At the Department of Community Services, we look to our community partners for various levels of expertise, Mr. Speaker, and this committee is one of those levels of expertise that we look to. And we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to seek out members for that committee. As no, Mr. Speaker, it is not at a full complement.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to documents obtained through the Freedom of Information, the committee has struggled to find members and has barely made quorum for some meetings. Community groups have difficulty getting information on meetings, and requests to present to the committee go unanswered. One of the challenges is finding parents whose children are or may be in need of care. I asked the minister, what assurances can she offer that every seat on the committee is now filled, will be filled with representatives of the appropriate populations?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And again, I thank my honourable colleague for bringing the important issue of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Children and Family Services to the floor. Mr. Speaker, again, we recognize that there are many components to this very important group, and we recognize that it's challenging, Mr. Speaker, as we've all experienced, to find members of the communities, Mr. Speaker, to step forward. We will continue to work hard. We'll continue to advertise in an attempt, Mr. Speaker, to get all of those positions filled.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, these parent members are a voice for parents who may have a child protection or apprehension issue. One of the seats was filled recently by a community services staffer in February. He has since left the committee, but that left a bad taste in the mouths of parents whose kids are in care. So I asked the minister, why 2 years after a court order are there still so many issues surrounding the Children and Family Services Act Committee?
The Honourable the Minister for Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I've spent quite a considerable amount of time with my honourable colleague across the way on these very important issues of child welfare. I know, Mr. Speaker, that he brings these questions, Mr. Speaker, to the floor of this House out of a sense of sincere passion and compassion, and I respect him for that. But, Mr. Speaker, I will not certainly allow the reputation of any of the employees of the Department of Community Services to be taken into question. The honourable member knows very well that the member who was on that committee resigned when he realized that it was inappropriate to be there. His intentions as the executive director under the new division of the department, Mr. Speaker, have been applauded by all members of the province, all members of the communities that are involved in that child and youth strategy, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly have full confidence in his ability, as I know Nova Scotians do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, in March of this year, Ontario invested over $1 million to help low-income women develop new skills and find employment in the trades. The Women in Skilled Trades program enables women to achieve journey person status in highly lucrative trades such as carpentry, welding, construction, landscaping, and metalworking. This program will help over 100 Ontario women to work their own way out of low income. I would like to ask the minister, when is her department going to introduce similar opportunities for women in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, obviously I would be an advocate for any program that would help provide education for women and men. And I would also suggest that I have attended some of the apprenticeship graduation programs and was very impressed by the number of women who are getting their journey person certificate. Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the minister will be aware of this, the rate of acceptance of apprenticeships in Nova Scotia is worryingly low at the moment. A recent survey published by the department shows only 8% of high school graduates are going into the trades. Less than 1/4 of these graduates are women. So, Mr. Speaker, when will the minister agree to develop programs that offer a strong incentive to women who may not realize how good a career the trades can be?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I will say to the member opposite that any programs that we can develop that will encourage any graduate to go into any program would be something that I will always continue to support.
The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the latest figures for apprenticeships in Nova Scotia show that there are 167 women apprentices in Nova Scotia. That's 5% of the total number of 4,100 apprentices. Over half of these women were apprentice cooks. Mr. Speaker, isn't it about time that we made sure that the trades provided equity of opportunity for women and for men.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the statistic that's shared, 167, is encouraging. I would expect if there was a comparison to the statistics of 10 or 20 years ago, we would see significant growth, and we will continue to see growth.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the federal government has recently introduced new trucking regulations. It appears that the province of Nova Scotia will be adopting these regulations, which on surface will place additional burden on small businesses in our province. Mr. Speaker, small trucking and excavation businesses in Richmond County are questioning the need for these new regulations, which will clearly add additional paperwork and administrative burdens on their business. My question to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure